The town of Serenity Cove, California, was a study in controlled perfection. Nestled in a sheltered bay north of Monterey, it was a place where the morning fog rolled in with punctual grace and retreated by 10 a.m., where the manicured lawns were a uniform shade of emerald, and the only sound after 9 p.m. was the distant, rhythmic sigh of the Pacific. It was a community that prized order above all else, a value embodied perfectly in its most fastidious resident, Arthur Finch. Arthur and his wife Clara lived in a modern, angular house on Cypress Drive, a structure of glass and reclaimed redwood that seemed to both embrace and defy the natural chaos of the coast. They had been married for 8 years, a span of time that had settled into a deep, comfortable pattern, a series of rituals as predictable as the tides. They were, to any neighbor peering through their perfectly clean windows, the picture of harmonious compatibility. Arthur was a senior structural engineer for a company that designed deep-sea communication arrays. His work was a ballet of precision, ensuring that colossal structures miles beneath the surface could withstand unimaginable pressures. His life mirrored his profession. He worked a demanding rotation of 21 days aboard the research vessel Ether, stationed in the Pacific Abyss, followed by 21 days of shore leave. These 3-week blocks defined his existence, a pendulum swinging between the controlled chaos of the open ocean and the absolute order of his home. Clara, in contrast, was a curator at a prestigious art gallery in Carmel by the Sea. Her world was one of curated emotion and subjective beauty. She thrived on networking, could discuss the merits of an obscure postmodern sculptor with a potential donor as easily as she could charm a room full of patrons at a fundraising gala. She was vibrant, adaptable, and the social engine of their partnership. Their differences were the bedrock of their apparent strength. Arthur's methodical nature provided a stable foundation. Clara's spontaneous energy painted the walls with color. She affectionately called him her human metronome, and she never mocked his need for order. In fact, she seemed to cherish it, a testament to the solid ground she had in a world of aesthetic flux. A central pillar of Arthur's domestic ritual was his study, and within it his collection of vintage Japanese single malt whiskeys. He was not a heavy drinker, but a connoisseur. Each bottle was a landmark, acquired from a remote distillery on Hokkaido during a layover, or gifted by a grateful client for work on a perilous project. They were not for casual consumption, they were artifacts of achievement. Among these prized possessions was a bottle of Karuizawa 1981, a legendary whiskey from a shuttered distillery. It was his grail. He had acquired it at auction years ago for a sum that made Clara's eyes widen, and it sat in a place of honor on a specially lit shelf. He had no specific occasion earmarked for its opening. Its purpose was simply to be, a symbol of patience, of reward deferred, of perfect potential. He knew its exact weight, the precise level of the amber liquid against the glass, the way the light refracted through its specific meniscus. These were not conscious observations. They were a part of his sensory map of home, as intrinsic as the feel of his own key in the door. Returning from a 3-week stint on the Ether, Arthur arrived home in the soft gray light of a Serenity Cove afternoon. He wheeled his hard-shelled suitcase into the vestibule, its click on the tile echoing in the quiet house. His ritual was immutable. Suitcase parked by the console table, hang his windbreaker in the hall closet, and proceed directly to his study. It was not a thirst for whiskey that drove him, but a thirst for equilibrium. A glance at the bottles was his way of taking a compass bearing, confirming that his world was still aligned to its true north. This time, the needle swung. The Karuizawa bottle was not where he had left it. It was a fraction of an inch off its mark. A microscopic layer of dust, which he would meticulously clean the next day, had been disturbed around its base. His hand, moving on autopilot, reached out and gently lifted the bottle. He turned it, his engineer's eye calculating the volume displacement. It was minuscule. Perhaps a single measure, no more than 30 milliliters, was missing. It could be evaporation. It could be a trick of the light, his eyes tired from the long journey.
But Arthur Finch did not believe in tricks of the light. He believed in data. He placed the bottle back in its exact position, his face a placid mask. He closed the cabinet, walked upstairs, and took a long, hot shower. The water did not wash away the nascent hum of dissonance now vibrating in his mind. He said nothing to Clara that evening. They shared a meal of seared scallops and a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, and he listened to her stories of gallery politics and local gossip. He was present, he was engaged, but a part of him was already running diagnostics. Back on the Aether, surrounded by the hum of servers and the vast indifferent ocean, the image of that bottle haunted him. It wasn't the loss of the precious liquid, it was the violation of a boundary. Someone had trespassed in his sanctuary, had touched something that was, in his carefully ordered universe, inviolable. 3 weeks later, he returned home. The ritual repeated. Suitcase, coat, study. He opened the cabinet. The Karo Izala had been disturbed again. Another finger's width was gone. The evidence was now incontrovertible. A coldness settled in his chest, a feeling far deeper than the chill of the deep ocean. Clara had no interest in whiskey, finding it overly harsh. Their friends were respectful, almost intimidated by his collection. None would help themselves without explicit permission. This was not an accident. This was a pattern. Confrontation, he knew, was the tool of the rash. A direct accusation would be met with a direct and likely prepared denial. Clara was a master of narrative. She could spin a convincing story from the thinnest of threads. If she was hiding something, a confrontation would only force her to hide it better. No. He needed evidence. He needed irrefutable data. And so, Arthur did what he did best. He engineered a solution. In the days before his next departure, he became a ghost in his own home, conducting quiet, thorough research. He needed eyes. He settled on a system of ultra-discreet wireless cameras with military-grade encryption and cloud storage. He ordered a kit, a camera disguised as a carbon monoxide detector for the hallway, one embedded in the housing of the living room's surround sound speaker, a pinhole lens cleverly integrated into the bookshelf facing his whiskey cabinet, and another in a digital photo frame on the mantelpiece that cycled through pictures of their trips to Big Sur. He installed them with the precision of a surgeon performing a bypass, his movements efficient and silent. He tested each feed, ensuring the angles were perfect, the motion activation sensitive, and the remote access flawless. The night before he left, he packed his bags while Clara slept. He looked at her peaceful face and felt a profound and terrifying disconnect. The woman he loved was a variable he could no longer predict. The journey to the Aether was a blur. Once aboard, he buried himself in work, diagnosing a faulty pressure sensor on a main array node. But in the quiet of his cabin, between shifts, he would open his secured laptop and access the live feeds. The first 2 days showed nothing but the mundane poetry of Clara's solitary life. Her morning coffee, her evening reading on the sofa, her phone conversations with her sister. He began to doubt his own sanity. Was he becoming paranoid? Had the isolation of deep-sea work finally fractured his famously steady mind? On the 4th day, the data stream delivered its verdict.
He was reviewing the motion-triggered recordings when a new file appeared. The timestamp showed 2:17 p.m. Serenity Cove time. The camera in the bookshelf captured the front door opening. Clara appeared, but she was not alone. Following her was Leo Weaver, their neighbor. Leo, the affable landscape architect who designed the drought-tolerant succulent garden in their front yard. Leo, who was always available to help carry groceries, recommend a good Pinot Noir, or loan a tool. Leo walked in with a familiarity that struck Arthur like a physical blow. He didn't pause or wait to be invited further. He moved into the living room as if he owned the space. Clara greeted him not with a neighborly smile, but with a look of hungry anticipation Arthur hadn't seen directed at him in years. She reached out and brushed a speck of lint from his collar, a gesture of intimate possession. They spoke for a moment, their bodies angled towards each other. Then Clara laughed at something he said, a light, musical sound the microphone barely picked up. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not a hesitant or exploratory kiss. It was deep, familiar, and full of a shared secret. Leo's hands went to her waist, pulling her closer against him. Arthur watched, frozen, as the silent movie of his marriage's destruction played out on the 15-inch screen. They moved to the sofa, their forms intertwining in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The camera, with its cold, unblinking eye, captured it all. The ease, the passion, the utter betrayal unfolding on the very couch where he and Clara would watch documentaries together. He closed the laptop. The hum of the ship's engines, usually a comforting white noise, now felt like the angry drone of a hornet's nest. He felt the blood drain from his face, his hands turning cold and clammy. A nausea arose in his throat, not from the sea's swell, but from the tectonic shift in his reality. Leo, the friendly, helpful neighbor, the man he'd shared a beer with on the deck just a month prior, discussing the best way to treat redwood decking. The hypocrisy was so vast, so cliché, it was almost laughable. But Arthur was not laughing. He was dismantling. When his rotation ended, Arthur returned to Serenity Cove a different man. He performed the familiar rituals with the expertise of a seasoned actor. He hugged Clara at the door, his arms feeling like foreign appendages. He presented her with a gift, a seashell from a remote atoll he'd fabricated a story about. Over dinner, he discussed the pressure sensor issue in minute technical detail, watching her feign interest perfectly. Later, he went to his study. He opened the cabinet and made a show of examining the bottles. "This is strange," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "The Carawisa. It seems like more is missing. I could have sworn I left it right here." He pointed to an imaginary line on the glass. Clara didn't even look up from her tablet. "Really? I wouldn't know, darling. You know I don't touch your precious whiskey. Maybe it's just evaporating. It is very old." Her tone was light, effortless, a perfect lie. "Maybe," Arthur conceded. He paused, then lobbed the next probe. "Did anyone come by while I was away? A delivery guy, maybe. Someone who might have been poking around." She shook her head, a picture of innocent confusion. No one. It's been very quiet, just me and my books." She smiled, a beautiful, empty smile. Arthur nodded slowly. "I see." He walked out of the room and went upstairs to their bedroom. He retrieved his laptop from his bag. His movements were deliberate, calm. He returned to the living room and placed the computer on the coffee table between them. "What's this?" Clara asked, her smile fading slightly at his expression. He didn't answer. He simply opened the folder, found the file, and pressed play. The color drained from Clara's face so completely she looked like a marble statue. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that was both immediate and absolute. She watched the silent, damning footage of herself and Leo, her body rigid with shock. When it ended, the room was suffocated by a silence louder than any scream. She broke first. Sobs racked her body. "Arthur, God, I'm so sorry. It happened. I was so lonely. The weeks were so long."
He sat, perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap. "How long?" he asked. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice he used when a structural calculation was critically flawed. She hesitated, choking on her tears. A few months." He absorbed the information. The timeline clicked into place in his mind, each missing measure of whiskey now correlated to a specific date of his absence. Why? The question wasn't asked in anguish, but in genuine, clinical curiosity. "I don't know. I missed you. He was just there." He attentive. "I am gone 21 days at a time to provide us with this life," Arthur stated as if reading from a project report. "If you were unhappy, the protocol was to communicate, to discuss. You chose a different path. You chose deception." She stumbled off the sofa, falling to her knees before him, grasping his hands. Please, Arthur, I love you. It was a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake. We can fix this. We can go to counseling." He withdrew his hands from her grasp as if from a fire. Love is not measured in words, Clara. It is measured in choices, in loyalty, in respect for shared space. He looked around the room, his gaze finally landing back on her. "You violated all of it. In our home." He stood up, walked to the hall closet, and pulled out a pillow and blanket. "I'll be in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow I will engage my lawyer. I want you out of this house by the end of the week." The next morning he was gone before she woke. He drove to the offices of Henderson and Shaw, the firm that had handled their property purchase. He sat in a cool, minimalist conference room and explained the situation to a sharply dressed attorney named Ms. Henderson in 3 succinct sentences. He provided her with the cloud storage access codes for the video evidence. He did not flinch. He did not weep. He instructed her to file for divorce on grounds of adultery and to pursue the most aggressive terms possible for the separation of assets. His calmness was more unnerving than any outburst of anger could have been. He then called his elderly parents who lived in a quiet retirement community in Santa Cruz. "There's been a development with Clara," he said, his voice even. "I need to stay with you for a while. I'll explain when I get there." His mother, Evelyn, asked no questions. "Your old room is always made up, Arthur. We'll see you soon." Their home was a world away from the stark modernism of Cypress Drive. It was filled with overstuffed furniture, the smell of slow-cooked meals, and a deep, unconditional quiet. They welcomed him with silent hugs and a pot of strong coffee. For them, his presence was a gift. Arthur, in turn, slipped easily into the role of caretaker. He fixed the sticky drawer in the kitchen, pruned the overgrown rose bushes, and drove his father to his physical therapy appointments. The simple, tangible tasks were a balm to his methodical soul.
He ignored the torrent of messages from Clara. Please, explanations, accusations, more please. They piled up in his phone, unread after the first few. He knew that engaging would be like trying to reason with a software bug. It would only create more errors. Silence was the only logical response. It was the only clean break. Clara, meanwhile, unraveled. She tried to maintain her professional facade at the gallery, but the gossip was a virus that spread through Serenity Cove's small, incestuous social circuit. Whispers followed her from the coffee shop to the supermarket. Her smile became a strained, brittle thing. The house, once a symbol of shared success, was now a gilded cage of shame as it underwent the slow, cold process of a market appraisal and legal asset division. Unable to bear the silence and the staring, she moved out before the sale was final. She found a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in a generic complex in Marina, a town away from the curated beauty of the peninsula. It was beige, impersonal, and smelled faintly of stale air freshener. It was a reflection of her new life, small, diminished, and utterly temporary. It was in this vulnerable state that Leo Weaver found his way back in. He appeared at her door a week after she'd moved, bearing a bottle of cheap wine and a contrite smile. He spoke of how much he'd missed her, how he understood her pain, how what they had was real, worth fighting for. Clara, isolated and emotionally flayed, latched onto this lifeline. His presence was a familiar warmth in the cold emptiness of her new existence. He started staying over. Then he practically moved in, his golf clubs appearing in the corner, his expensive cologne taking up space in her tiny bathroom. For a few weeks, Clara convinced herself that a beautiful, passionate thing could be salvaged from the wreckage. They played house. They cooked meals together, went for walks on the less scenic beach, and lost themselves in the physicality of a relationship no longer forced into hiding. She saw it as her second chance, a silver lining forged in the fire of her own poor choices. But reality soon intruded. Leo, the charming, helpful neighbor, was a different man behind closed doors when the novelty began to wear off. He was moody, possessive,
and had a fondness for gin that eroded his affable exterior. The man who designed serene gardens had a temper that was anything but tranquil. A petty argument over a dish left in the sink would escalate into a night-long sulk. A comment about his spending would trigger a barrage of criticism about her nagging. The sharp, witty man became sharp and cutting. Clara, already emotionally bankrupt, tried to appease him, blaming herself for rocking the boat, desperate to hold on to this last, fragile connection. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Leo had been drinking. Clara asked, timidly, if he could contribute to the grocery bill since he was staying there most nights. He stared at her for a long, cold moment before sweeping his arm across the counter, sending a vase of flowers she had bought that morning crashing to the floor. "Is that all I am to you? A paycheck? After everything I've risked for you? You'd be drowning in your own misery if it wasn't for me."
The violence of the gesture, the sheer venom in his voice, acted like a bucket of ice water. In that moment, Clara saw the future with terrifying clarity, a long, slow descent into walking on eggshells, into managing the moods of a selfish and unstable man. The loneliness she felt with Arthur away at sea was a peaceful solitude compared to the toxic loneliness of being with the wrong person. She said nothing. She simply turned, walked into the bedroom, and locked the door. She heard him rant for another minute before the front door slammed shut. The next morning, while he was at work, she moved with an efficiency that would have made Arthur proud. She packed every one of his belongings into black trash bags and placed them outside her apartment door. She sent him a single, unambiguous text message: "Your things are outside. Do not come back. Do not contact me again." When he came to collect them, he pounded on the door, his voice alternating between pleading and fury. Clara stood silently on the other side, her back against the wood, shaking but resolute. She had escaped one prison of her own making, only to willingly walk into another. She would not make that mistake a third time. The months that followed were a study in contrasting trajectories. Arthur, in Santa Cruz, used the proceeds from the house sale to purchase a compact, light-filled bungalow with a view of the ocean. He furnished it sparingly, with only pieces he chose himself. There were no ghosts in this house. He took up woodworking, finding solace in the smell of sawdust and the tangible progress of creating something with his hands. He began having quiet dinners with old college friends he'd lost touch with. He was not happy, not yet, but he was at peace. He had navigated the crisis with the same calm precision as he used to navigate engineering problems, and he had reached stable ground. Clara, in her beige apartment, remained adrift. The gallery felt alien to her now. She could no longer convincingly sell the fantasy of beauty and meaning. Old friends had quietly distanced themselves. The silence of her evenings was profound, broken only by the muffled sounds of neighbors' televisions. She would often find herself thinking of Arthur, not of the dramatic confrontation or the divorce, but of the small, quiet moments. The way he would always have a cup of tea ready for her when she got home from a late event. The absolute certainty of his presence. She had mistaken his steadiness for dullness, his loyalty for taken-for-granted security. She realized too late that she hadn't fallen out of love with him. She had simply stopped seeing the value in what he offered, blinded by the cheap sparkle of something new. She had chosen a thrilling chaos over a profound peace. And in the end, the chaos had consumed everything, leaving her with nothing but the echo of her own poor judgment. She had lost the man who built steady foundations for a man who only knew how to dig holes. Arthur had rebuilt his life, plank by steady plank. Clara remained in the wreckage, understanding finally that some choices are irrevocable,
Some betrayals are not just against a person, but against the very architecture of a shared life. And once that structure is compromised, it can never be safely inhabited again. The truth had arrived for them both, and for Clara, it had come far too late.